What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing how to work a scene in street photography, breaking down my contact sheets, the behind the scenes and photo breakdowns of the photographs that I've made throughout my journey in Coney Island over the past 3 years. I photographed in this location 3 different times: 2023 on July 12th, in 2024 I went for the 4th of July, and then finally this year in 2025 I returned again for the 4th of July. And so we'll be having a little discussion here about working the scene, why this matters, and hopefully at the end of this video you'll have some valuable understanding about how to apply this to your practice so that you can increase your ability to create more compelling imagery on the streets. Because ultimately, I believe working the scene is one of these foundational thoughts and ways in which you can approach photography to increase the likelihood of you actually making something. And so first and foremost, I want to announce that I have 3 different ebooks on my website at dantesisofo.com. They're free. If you go to the books tab on my website navigation bar, I have the ultimate guide to the Ricoh GR, where you can find all of the information about how I set my camera up, the techniques and the philosophy behind my photography. So if you enjoy the photographs that you see in this video, I essentially break down exactly how to apply these different techniques with my workflow. I also have a contact sheets book where you can look at the behind the scenes of my images, and then finally the Mastering Layer in Street Photography guide, where you can find all of my insights about what I believe to be the foundational principle of what makes a successful composition, being layering. And so let's get into the video. Photography has nothing to do with photography. What does this mean, and why does this matter? I believe that photography has everything to do with how you engage with humanity out there in the open world on the front lines of life. And so when I work a scene, when I approach the streets, I'm a human being first and foremost. And I just bring the camera for the ride, and I live my everyday life and snapshot my way through these scenes. And so you can see here in Coney Island, I'm underneath the boardwalk watching as this woman and her friend are dancing under the boardwalk by the sea. And it's a very random day. It's July 12th, 2023, and I recall it was a very empty day on the beach. There wasn't many people, there wasn't much happening. However, by remaining open and curious and then finding myself under the boardwalk, I discovered something beautiful. I was watching and observing as these people were dancing, and as I approached the 2 of them, my friend Matthew and I began having a conversation with them, engaging at the scene. And then as I started to speak with them, she handed me her speaker, we were dancing, and then I started to make some photographs and work the scene. And so as you can see, I pulled out my Ricoh as I'm holding her speaker and she's dancing, and we're enjoying the music, and the moment is beautiful, and I'm photographing humanity. I'm looking for that human element in the photograph, that sort of emotional impact of the gesture, of the dance, of the emotion on the faces. And this beautiful, elegant moment occurred very spontaneously and randomly upon my discovery under the boardwalk. And so first and foremost, be a human being first. You don't have to be so afraid to engage on the streets. You don't have to be so afraid of, approaching strangers and asking for permission to make pictures, or just simply engaging more with life when you're on the streets. I think this is really, really important to highlight as the sort of forefront of this video, so that you can understand how I apply this to my personal workflow and how I come home with these kind of photos, right? And so you can see the contact sheet here, behind the scenes, photographing with repetition at the scene. And so I'm moving my body very slightly, adjusting myself, photographing very repetitively, so that I can increase my ability to synthesize things. So ultimately what I look for when I'm making a picture like this is synthesizing the formal elements of composition, being the lines, the shape, the geometry, the formal sort of glue that holds down the photograph, and relate that to the content in the frame, to the emotional impact of the human element in the picture, of the gesture, of the people. And so I'm aware of my background. I'm analyzing the boardwalk and the way the pillars fill the frame, and then finally adjusting my body in relationship to the moment and the background that I blew out by overexposing by like 2 stops or whatever on my Ricoh with the exposure compensation dial. And then using that technique to sort of elevate the frame with this sort of elegant backdrop, where we have the white sand, the white beach, right, the water and the reflective sort of surface to my advantage, to then fill the background of the frame with something simple where the people in the frame are then easy to read. And so as you can see in some of the other frames where I was using the boardwalk as my backdrop, the subjects get more lost in the composition. And so by positioning myself slightly to the left or slightly to the right, I was finding that sweet spot while working the scene to create this photograph. And so be like a child, right? Be curious, living in the spirit of play. This to me is the forefront of my practice. I never really take myself so seriously, and I like to engage with the streets this way so that I can come home with a photograph through the spirit of play. It's not this serious, rational thing of you going out in the world, analyzing the world as like, a composition or a photograph, but you engage with humanity firstly. Your curiosity guides you, and then your instinct, when you press the shutter, is the result of that kind of, moment, that picture that you're looking for. And here we have the result of the image, right? We have the woman in the foreground looking to the right-hand side, the man on the right-hand side in the middle there looking to the left-hand side, he's gazing back at her, and then finally the cherry on top, this small sort of gesture of the woman on the left in the background and her reflective sort of silhouette casted upon the water, adding some more depth to the frame. And so this photograph was very simple and elegant. As I break it down here in this video, we can see here the main hero of our frame being this woman in relationship to the man who she was dancing with, right? And so 1, 2, we already have 2/3 of the frame filled, right? And so when you break the frame up this way, you can see on 3 different planes, from the foreground, middle ground, and background, we fill the frame very simply. 1, 2, 3. Each element takes up 1/3 of the frame. And this is something that happens very intuitively. It's not so rational when I'm photographing, but I'm working the scene, moving my body, and allowing things to unfold naturally. Photographing with repetition in the spirit of play. Through my curiosity, by engaging with humanity, resulting in this kind of photograph that I believe elevates humanity and champions this sort of everyday mundane moment on the beach. And this to me is the art of working the scene in street photography. It's going to give you the ability to get closer to the people that you're photographing, not only in physical proximity, but in emotional depth, where you actually have an exchange with this person. You can chat with the people and then become a fly on the wall at the scene and then come home with the more impactful photograph. And so this is the secret sauce. Don't be afraid to engage. The photograph is a result of where you position your physical body in relationship to the subject and the background. This is the foundational thought that I have about composition in photography. It's a very simple thought, but I want this to be nailed in your head, because ultimately this to me is the art of photography. It's a very physical medium. And so at this particular scene, I'm watching as these people are playing basketball on the beach. And it was a very beautiful random moment. I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen basketball on the street, or on the beach rather. And so I'm here once again at the scene. I'm present, I'm engaged with humanity as I'm making these photographs. You can see here in this behind the scenes video, my shirt's off, I'm on the beach, I'm chatting with the boys, and I come up and I start to dunk on them. I start to sort of play defense, and I'm engaged with the scene. And I was there when I pressed the shutter. I was playing at this scene when I photographed on this beach. And so this to me is the art of working the scene. It's being engaged with humanity and then coming home with the photograph. And so, as you can see, working the scene here with my hand outstretched, playing defense, okay? I'm not even taking pictures at this point. However, as I continuously play, I then raise my Ricoh up to my wrist and start to make pictures at this particular scene. And so, what I was saying earlier about the physical position of the photographer in relationship to the subject in the background is really critical here, because, I find that when I was photographing this particular scene of this moment of the dunk, I was analyzing my background firstly, and I was trying to think, where can I position this moment in relationship to the different elements in the background so that I can synthesize something here between that moment of the dunk and the beautiful background of that tower where we have the parachute ride that's very iconic in Coney Island. And so as you can see, this contact sheet, I'm making lots of pictures. I'm moving my way through the scene by clicking more than less. I think this is really critical. You don't have to click once and move on. Be present, be patient. And so as I'm photographing and I'm making these relationships and analyzing the things that I'm looking at when I'm photographing, I make a very simple physical compositional decision, dropping to a low angle to separate the subject from the background in relationship to the tower on the left-hand side, right? Where photography is a visual game of you putting together the foreground, middle ground, background, synthesizing the composition formally, and a physical pleasure right? It requires you to move your body through the world, to be engaged physically, and to position yourself physically to solve these visual problems. And so I like to think of photography like visual problem solving. And so here you have the result of the photograph, this basketball scene at Coney Island on the beach, a very beautiful day here. And as you can see, the way in which I broke down this particular scene, solving the visual puzzle, was by firstly recognizing my background, okay? And so my background is set with this tower here. I was very aware of that tower, right? And so as I was aware of that tower, I made sure to position it on the left-hand side in relationship to the moment in the foreground of this man who's dunking the basketball. This was the decisive moment that I was looking for. And we have the basketball hoop, of course, adding context to the scene as he's going to dunk here on the beach. And so once again, 1, 2, 3, 3 simple elements, 3 simple planes, synthesizing the moment from the background. But I'm looking at my background firstly, analyzing that tower there and plugging it in accordingly in relationship to the way in which I position my physical body at a low angle so that I can photograph and separate the moment from the background. And so don't leave the scene until the scene leaves you, right? When I was photographing at that scene, I was playing, I was dunking, I was having fun, and then I was making pictures. And I didn't really leave the scene until the energy died down. I didn't leave the scene until I recognized that the scene was basically over, and then I leave the scene, right? And so here you can see this context sheet where I'm photographing another scene of people playing on the beach. And so we have people playing soccer. And when there's balls flying and people moving and there's this sort of tension of chaos, you can sense the possibility of something. You can sense the possibility that you're going to make a photograph of something interesting. You know, when you see people move and you see these gestures and the human emotion on the face, the emotional, impact of people's facial expressions, and there's all this chaos, sit still. Don't just make a picture and move on. When I photographed at this particular scene this year on the 4th of July in Coney Island in 2025, I was enamored by this scene because I was so amazed by the talent and the skill of these soccer players. They were so good to just watch and observe. And so I stayed there for 30 minutes and I was making lots of pictures, and I dropped to a low angle because I knew that was the sort of proper position to then separate the sort of elements of movement and the sort of ball flying and the feet kicking and all these different elements from the background. And so I used this sort of technique of fishing at the scene where I'm positioning myself and I'm basically not moving, and I'm just allowing life to unfold in front of me and waiting for things to align and then responding to that gut instinct to press the shutter. And so as I listened to my instinct and followed my gut by being patient and being observant at the scene, basically spending like 30 minutes here, I watched as this girl ran by very briefly and quickly with her hair flowing and her joyous smile, and she lined up perfectly, holding this beautiful little ring toy that then separates the boy who is playing football in the background, right smack dab in that little bullseye of this ring. The ball is flying, there's chaos in the background, you can see the beach and the water and people playing. And it's a very imperfect composition where we have lots of different details that overlap and things that aren't so perfectly aligned, but there's that instinct when I press the shutter that I noticed this girl run by that triggered me to press the shutter, and then the ball flies and the bullseye lines up smack dab in the middle, and we have this boy who's revealed that sort of tension between the foreground, the middle ground, and the background interplay here in a very sort of irregular, imperfect way that is a result of my patience and my presence by being there at the scene and by waiting for things to unfold, by sensing the possibility of something. And so I have this really important philosophy in my practice of repetition, patience, pattern recognition, and intuition. These elements you should really think about how to include in your practice, because it really does require you to be there and be present through patience, photographing with repetition, recognizing the different patterns, right, of the movement of the ball flying, of the man kicking, and then responding intuitively through your instincts to then press the shutter. And so I didn't leave that scene until the scene left me. So I'm still photographing at the scene after I felt that instinct to press the shutter as the girl ran by with the ring. And so I'm continuously photographing. And so I'm making more pictures. I'm not leaving the scene. I still sense the possibility of more. And then ultimately this man's leg outstretches and kicks the ball up into the air, and I make a more graphic frame. And so we have here this ball that's being kicked from the man's leg outstretched in relationship to the chaos of the beach in the background. And this was actually a perfect moment where the sun was sort of like covered by the clouds and we have a different lighting condition, and it actually worked in my favor. However, if I compared the two images from this particular scene, I believe the winner photograph would be the shot that I made of the girl with the ring. And you might be wondering why. And so I look for a photograph that has a more interesting human element, the sort of emotion and the joy of the girl and her wind and the wind blowing her hair. You know, there's something more here that I find to be engaging for a viewer. There's some more emotion in the frame, there's movement, there's energy. Whereas this photograph is a bit more graphic, right? You have the formal element of the leg and it sort of fits perfectly in the composition. Smack dab in the middle, we have the ball. There's that decisive moment and tension. But I believe when analyzing two different frames that you make from a scene, you should try to think critically about why a certain photograph is the keeper and why the other photograph is one to ditch. I think they're both strong frames, but this one lacks that human element and is a bit too graphic for my personal taste. And so finally, courage and instinct are so critical in street photography. Listen to your gut and go forward with courage. You know, at the end of the day, on July 4th, 2025, the sun was setting, the lifeguards went home, and it was maybe we had 30 minutes of sunlight left, and I was with my friend Umberto, and we were watching as people started to climb the rocks as the lifeguards left. And so, you know, all hell breaks loose when the lifeguards leave, right? Everybody starts climbing the rocks and going as far as they can and jumping and sort of cliff diving. And so Umberto suggested, let's go on the rocks. And I followed with my friend here. And yeah, we climbed all the way across these rocks. And ultimately it required a lot of courage to do this, right? I had to go out there and sort of crawl my way upon these rocks, walking and hoping I don't slip, really being patient and, you know, just playing like a child once again, you know, following that sort of childlike joy and curiosity. And then ultimately I wind up stumbling across a very beautiful scene. The golden hour hits, the sun is setting, we're in that sweet spot where there's people moving. We have the different rocks and the different things that set the structure of my stage here that I'm photographing upon. And then these boys enter the frame. This group of friends that are going to dive into the water and just enjoying their sort of like a day of play here on the 4th of July. However, they became these heroes in my frame. You know, they became these sort of champions that I was photographing, almost like demigods upon the rocks. And you know, is this not the goal of photography? To champion humanity? You know, I find when I make a photograph, my goal is to elevate the people in my frames, to champion the mundane, to champion the everyday experience of human life. And I find that when I'm making a picture, through my courage and my instinct, embracing the spirit of play, I position myself at the right place, at the right time where the light falls, and everything else just aligns naturally. And then I'm just there and I'm watching life unfold and people are moving into my stage. And I click the shutter at that moment when the boy on the right-hand side here gazes out towards the outskirts of the frame. And all of the different puzzle pieces align from the background there of the other boys engaged at the scene. And they almost look like statues, like these Greek demigods. And I conquered the day at the end of this 4th of July celebration. And I felt so good after making these frames. And it was just such a beautiful experience to, you know, spend with my friend Umberto and to have fun along the beach and then still come home with something successful and come home with an interesting photograph. You know, you can go out there and simply enjoy the day, detached from the outcome of you making something strong. And then through that mindset of you simply enjoying the day, embracing play, going forward with courage and following your intuition, you can come home with a successful composition that describes what it's like to live on this earth. And to me, these children here playing upon the rocks are like Greek demigods, these sculptures pasted upon this sort of beautiful scene of these rocks in Coney Island beach. And so the point is that photography has everything to do with how you engage with humanity, right? It has nothing to do with photography at all. And so to work a scene, be a human being first. Engage with life. Sense the possibility of something. Be patient. Observe the patterns and photograph through your gut. And then elevate the human experience of our everyday life. You know, this to me is the goal of the photographer that's working on the streets in this candid nature of practicing street photography. And so here are the 3 frames that I've made from Coney Island's beach, 2023 to 2025 here. And so I'm very happy to share these ideas with you today. I find that ultimately photography has simply provided me with so much joy in my life, and I want to share that with you and hopefully teach you a few things that you can then apply to your photography. I think it really does come down to your philosophy, your mindset, less so than the technique, or more so than the technique. And so these are just some of my ideas about working the scene in street photography. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to go to dantesisofo.com. I have a books tab once again where you can find all the free ebooks that I've listed there. I have a start here page with a variety of videos. I have a 2-hour series from Mumbai, India, where you can watch a full behind the scenes video of me working in the streets from my GoPro POV. There's a lot of different blog posts that I post up there, a lot of different behind the scenes tips and tricks and things that I discuss on there. And yeah, thank you for watching the video. If this provided value for you, feel free to scan the QR code. And if you're not a normie, you can send me some Satoshis. And it's kind of just a fun gesture because, you know, I'm an independent artist, and, you know, I believe in the future of digital technology and specifically Bitcoin. And so if you're out there and you're enjoying these videos and you want to join the revolution, yeah, send some sats to the QR code, and yeah, let's conquer the future together. All right, thank you for watching the video. I will see you in the next one. Peace.